Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm Tom Lanny. I'm the director of the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture here at the college. The McFarland Center sponsors and supports programs that foster dialogue on issues of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation. You can learn more about the past events that we sponsored at holycross.edu/McFarland Center, and in a couple days you'll be able to see this talk online so you can tell your classmates or roommates, whoever, what they missed and what they ought to go back and see. Today's talk that I'm here to introduce is part of the philosophy colloquia. I'm grateful to Professor Chichavatsky and encourage you to check out the Department of Philosophy schedule of upcoming lectures, which is right out there, posted outside. The United States, I don't know if you know or if you're aware or unaware, the United States is the country with the highest incarceration rates in the world, and not just by a little. It's really startling to consider. We are a social outlier when it comes to putting people in prison. You'd be shocked to see how far below us many of the countries are that we consider to be authoritarian and unfree and problematic, how far below on the rankings they are, or to see how many times higher our incarceration rate is than many other developed countries in the world. We have important questions to ask ourselves as a society about why we imagine such levels of incarceration are necessary, or even why we think they make us safer or better off. In the last few years, I've seen signs that our society, even our politicians, may be collectively rethinking from the right and the left the way that we assign moral blame and demand accountability for crime after decades of focusing entirely on retribution and mass incarceration. Still, for every 2 steps forward, I sometimes feel there are 2 steps, even 2 steps back, and the outcome, we have a deeply held desire as a society to equate justice and retribution as the same. Today I'm grateful to welcome a philosopher whose recent work helps us to think with greater clarity about what we're doing when we hold people to account morally using the criminal justice system. Erin Kelly, a moral philosopher, is professor of philosophy at Tufts University, where she's chaired the Department of Philosophy and has served as director of its Peace and Justice Studies program. Professor Kelly's research is focused on questions of justice, the nature of moral reasons, moral responsibility and desert, and theories of punishment. Professor Kelly has published dozens of academic papers and presented extensively at universities in the United States and abroad. Her book, The Limits of Blame, Rethinking Punishment and Responsibility, was published last year by Harvard University Press. She's also edited 2 volumes, a special issue of the Monist on collective responsibility and social ontology this last year, and in 2001, Justice is Fairness, which is a restatement or an update of John Rawls' famous book, A Theory of Justice, one of the great books I hope most of the undergraduates here will read if you're philosophy students. There's a lot at stake in this conversation, even if many of us are so sheltered from the issue that we never come to consider it. So I'm grateful to Professor Kelly, who will help us consider some of those issues more clearly and carefully, as only a philosopher can do.
Thanks so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you about this topic, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about it in the discussion at the end. Retributive justice is expressed roughly by the concept of lex talionis, the law of retaliation. Today, we mostly reject the notion that criminal offenders deserve punishment that resembles their crimes in kind. Although we kill some murderers, we do not rape rapists or disfigure people who have scarred others. Yet many people endorse the idea that criminal offenders deserve harms that are proportional in degree to their blameworthy wrongdoing. In fact, the justice of proportional harming seems obvious to many people. It's not obvious to me, and I'm going to make several arguments against it. I will argue that the retributive theory of criminal justice neglects the importance of the relationship between the practice of punishment and the broader requirements of social justice. Defenders of the retributive view do not relate the aims of the criminal justice system to a democratically just social order. They think retribution is a requirement of morality, whether or not it furthers democratic justice. I think examining the importance of the relationship between criminal justice and democratic values should lead us to reject retribution as the rationale for criminal justice in a democratic society. To make my point, I'll distinguish several strands of justice. Justice demands individual accountability for wrongdoing. It also aims to establish a justifiable socioeconomic order, democratic equality, and reparations for historical wrongs. These strands may seem to be separable, as though we could aspire to achieve justice along one dimension but not another. Nevertheless, I'll make the case for an interconnected solution to problems of injustice. A society that aspires to embrace democratic values will relate standards of individual accountability to prospects for achieving social justice. Proponents of the retributive theory do not appreciate this, and this is a weakness of their theory. So I'm going to begin from an early attempt to articulate a general theory of justice. Plato's Republic is the first philosophical treatise on the subject of justice. It was written as a dialogue between real persons who lived in Athens in the 5th century BCE. The central character is Socrates. Socrates encounters various figures around the city and questions them about what they know. In particular, he challenges them to define justice. Several characters try their luck. An early moment in the Republic recalls the poet Simonides, who was greatly admired and reputed to be a wise man. Simonides is reported to have said, "It is just to give to each what is owed to him." The idea that justice involves giving to each what is owed has its appeal, and Plato himself seems drawn to it. It seems to capture the fairness, balance, and sensitivity of justice. But how exactly are we to make sense of Simonides' principle? What could be owed as a matter of justice? Goods, opportunities, recognition, rights, rewards, punishments? And what affects who is owed and how much is owed? Does justice respond to a person's contribution, need, moral status, inheritance, talent, behavior? Philosophers have debated these difficult questions. Simonides' principle is abstract, and if it's attractive, as some of the characters in Plato's dialogue seem to think it is, it requires interpretation. In Book 1 of the Republic, Polemarchus is eager to offer insight. Justice involves benefiting your friends, he says, and harming your enemies. He's immediately challenged by Socrates and other characters in the dialogue to refine his understanding to correct for possible bias. After all, what if, unbeknownst to me, my friends are bad people who ought to be my enemies? In that case, how could it be just to benefit them? Polemarchus quickly refines his definition. Justice involves benefiting your friends, he says, provided they really are good people, and harming your enemies, provided they're actually bad. Polemarchus' proposal affirms the value of loyalty. But loyalty bears a tenuous relationship to justice, since loyalties are too often tribal and divisive, and justice purports to be impartial. In that respect, Polemarchus' thinking is provincial. But in another respect, his interpretation of Simonides' wisdom moves in the direction of an idea that's surprisingly modern, or at least familiar. What he proposes is close to the notion that the aim of justice is to confer benefits on the good and burdens on the bad. Justice, on this line of thinking, is connected with the notion of moral desert. Justice requires that people get what they deserve. Good people deserve praise and other benefits. Bad people deserve to be blamed and harmed. There's a vast literature in philosophy on praise and blame, how these notions should be understood and why they're essential to morality. According to some philosophers, praise and blame are bedrock notions, so to speak. Good, bad, right, wrong, and justice are all understood in relation to who and what, to what and who is worthy of praise or blame. A person who acts well deserves praise and benefits. A person who does wrong deserves blame, condemnation, and negative consequences, including punishment. Justice is served when deserved benefits and burdens are delivered. So let's call this the notion of just deserts. So justice is something we build up from a foundation of praise and blame, or so it's thought. I disagree with the importance moral philosophers assign to praise and blame, especially when it comes to thinking about justice. I reject the idea that justice is a matter of allocating just deserts, and I'll try to explain why. To begin with, what's notable here in the modern preoccupation with who deserves what is the centrality of the notion of individual responsibility, a notion that's murkier than proponents of blame can afford to admit. Contemporary moral philosophers believe that what people deserve is determined by how they act and who they are, or, more precisely, according to this popular view, how people act determines who they are and what they deserve. The idea is that we make ourselves into the particular persons we turn out to be by endorsing reasons, values, attitudes, good or bad, that are in effect the principles of our action. So this process of self-constitution defines our moral status and determines what we deserve. A person who organizes his life around the pursuit of money, acquiring more than he needs, and disregarding the interests of other people is greedy and deserves scorn. A person who disrespects other people's property rights and helps herself to their possessions is a thief who deserves not only disapproval but also harsh treatment. The best student deserves the highest grade. The better team deserves to win the trophy. Morally good people deserve admiration and praise. A criminal offender deserves punishment. So understood, a focus on moral accountability is central to contemporary philosophies of criminal justice. Criminal justice concerns how legal institutions should respond to people who violated criminal laws. The focus of moral philosophies of criminal justice is typically the practice of punishment. Theorists attempt to answer such questions as, what is the aim of punishment? What forms of punishment are acceptable and why? When are we permitted to punish and when are we required to punish? The most popular philosophy of criminal justice today centers on the notion of retributive justice. As I've already suggested, the retributive principle affirms that criminal wrongdoers deserve to be harmed in proportion to their blameworthy wrongdoing. Wrongdoing is blameworthy when it reflects ill will or other undesirable traits that are characteristic of the wrongdoer. In that case, justice demands retribution, according to this philosophy. The retributive philosophy stresses a connection between the notion of moral desert and the value of retribution. In more colloquial terms, it buys into the logic of payback. There are many problems with the retributive theory as an account of criminal justice, and I'm going to focus on three. The first concerns the practice of criminal justice. Our system of criminal justice is characterized by a misalignment between the practice of punishment and evaluations of moral blameworthiness. People who are more likely to get caught up in the criminal justice system tend not to be those who are plausibly thought to be the most morally blameworthy. For example, mental illness is rampant among the prison population. Intellectual disability is also thought to be more prevalent among prison inmates than among the non-prison population. Mental illness and intellectual disability are morally mitigating factors. They compromise a person's moral responsibility. But with few exceptions, the law does not treat them as such. So consider some cases you might read about in law textbooks. Eric Clark shot and killed a police officer. Our society demands the harshest penalties, often life in prison or death, for crimes like his. He was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence. In 2006, the United States Supreme Court heard his appeal. Why? Because when Eric Clark pulled the trigger, he was desperately trying to defeat a dangerous space alien. He was suffering from serious paranoid schizophrenia. The court acknowledged his delusional schizophrenia, but affirmed his conviction and life sentence. It ruled that his psychosis was irrelevant to determining whether he intended to kill a human being. Hence, his psychosis did not mitigate his guilt. Now consider Sharon Patterson's case. She was caring for a 2-year-old boy who was not her son. When he wet his bed, she decided to stop giving him water in the evening. He also sometimes refused solid food, and to get him to eat, she decided to restrict his water during the day as well. Withholding water from a child is a dangerous thing to do, and as a result, the boy died. Sharon Patterson was charged with criminally negligent homicide and given 10 years in prison. It's also the case, and presumably relevant to morality, that Sharon Patterson is intellectually disabled. She didn't understand the harm she was doing. She thought she was helping. The court recognized that she didn't understand the danger of her actions, but it upheld her conviction on the basis that a reasonable person would have. Her disability did not mitigate her criminal guilt. Or what about a person who steals to support a drug addiction? Over 2 million people are afflicted by an opioid disorder in the United States today. Many crimes, by some estimates, the vast majority of all felonies, are related to drug and alcohol dependence because they are committed by people who are either under the influence or seeking to support an addiction. But addiction does not mitigate punishment for any crime. Or consider the thousands of cases in the United States of people sentenced to life in prison for crimes they committed as juveniles. Studies show that childhood abuse and neglect increase criminal delinquency by at least 40%. That truth, however, mitigates neither guilt nor punishment. Our legal system has decreed that people such as these are legally culpable, though the personal hardships of mental illness, trauma, and addiction represent problems that would be difficult for most people to manage well. None of them mitigates the law's assessment of criminal culpability, or not much. The same holds true for the limitations of intellectual disability and immaturity. Short of the extremes of mental illness that qualify as legal insanity, which is a technical notion, much narrower than our understanding of even quite serious mental illness, the vast majority of mentally ill, intellectually disabled, traumatized, addicted, and immature people are ruled criminally guilty when it has been established that they've committed criminal acts. Mental illness, intellectual disability, trauma, and addiction may diminish moral blameworthiness, but they do not mitigate criminal guilt. I think it's hard to make ethical sense of these legal results. At the very least, they pose a serious challenge to the notion that moral retribution fits the law. Defenders of a retributive philosophy might respond by claiming that we need to make some adjustments to our criminal justice system. They might argue that our criminal justice system does not now deliver just desserts, but it could if we were to reduce the sentences of teenagers, people afflicted with mental illness or addiction, and those who are intellectually disabled. Actually, the courts have expressed some sympathy with these ideas, at least when it comes to the very harshest penalties, specifically the death penalty and life without parole. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the death penalty is unconstitutional when applied to juveniles or the mentally ill, and that juveniles cannot receive mandatory sentences of life without parole. Defenders of a retributive principle might also posit that we should go easier on people with substance addictions. The devastating opioid epidemic has increased public sympathy for a less punitive approach to the crimes of addiction. Now that addiction is no longer imagined to afflict only the ghetto poor, it has become a cause of public outcry. For example, the Attorney General of our state is currently suing the corporate pushers of prescription painkillers on behalf of the public. So it might be thought that by punishing less and more selectively, we still have a chance to deliver retributive justice. Yet reforming the law to better fit the requirements of retributive justice will be difficult, if not impossible, to achieve because some disturbed people pose a danger to others. Though we're too quick to think that incarceration is the best response to criminal wrongdoing, legal consequences are important when people criminally harm others. A non-retributive approach to punishment maintains that we owe it to victims and potential victims to incapacitate, deter, and rehabilitate people who have demonstrated a willingness to violate the rights of other people. Deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation are plausible reasons to punish. Acknowledging the seriousness of crime, recognizing the harm victims have suffered, and seeking to prevent further violations requires serious steps that may include imposing burdens on criminal lawbreakers to discourage and prevent them from committing crimes. While some people are so impaired that efforts to deter them can have no rational influence, that's not true of all people whose capacity for morality might be diminished. Furthermore, incapacitation may be effective when deterrence is not, and medical treatment and other alternatives to incarceration are promising in many cases. While treatment programs are not what we traditionally think of as punishment, requiring them can be a reasonable response to criminal behavior. Deterrence and rehabilitation, while difficult to achieve, are plausible reasons to punish. Yet these consequence-sensitive rationales move us away from the retributive thesis. It's no longer moral desert, but rather the importance of measures to enhance security for our rights that call for the use of punishment or other interventions. So understood, the use of punishment is guided by its possible benefits, greater protection for basic rights. Its use would be permissible only when it is, in this way, successful and at an acceptable price, a price that includes the harm punishment does to those who are made to suffer it. There's no justice in punishment per se. Once we abandon the model of just deserts, we may recognize that harming criminal offenders is not as such important. It's only good or justifiable when it produces beneficial consequences. Let me now turn to a second objection to the retributive theory. In talking about individual responsibility and desert, I've left Polemarchus behind. Recall Polemarchus' insistence that a just person would benefit good people and harm bad people. We discussed the connection between this proposal and the modern notion of moral desert. But the Greeks didn't have a modern notion of individual responsibility with its focus on moral desert. Socrates was dissatisfied with Polemarchus' idea for a different reason. He was of the view that harming unjust people makes them worse. Socrates asks, how could it ever be just to cause greater injustice? He maintains that it could not be. A just person, he thinks, would never intentionally cause greater injustice. So Polemarchus is wrong about what justice demands. Justice could not require harming bad people when doing so would make them worse. We might ask ourselves Socrates' question, given how we treat people who we condemn to prison. As it's practiced today in the United States, incarceration is dehumanizing and violent. Prison hurts and permanently alienates people. Those who are let out of prison have great trouble finding jobs and readjusting to life in society. It's extremely difficult for them to make a decent life for themselves if and when they are released. Not surprisingly, recidivism rates are alarming. Many former inmates are jobless, homeless, traumatized, angry, and tempted to commit crimes. How could it be just to harm people and make them worse? Do we have a good response to Socrates' challenge? And why are we so invested in the practice of punishment? Socrates claims he does not know how to define justice, but he observes that injustice, however exactly we define it, causes war, conflict, and fighting, while justice brings friendship and a sense of common purpose. On this way of thinking, justice is not a matter of assigning individual responsibility and calculating praise and blame. It's a social order, a peaceful order that serves a common purpose. Justice is an overall state of society. It's a collective achievement. This idea of justice as a peaceful and mutually beneficial social order fits contemporary discussions in philosophy of the notion of distributive justice. Distributive justice is a virtue of institutions, not persons. Social institutions, including government, law, an educational system, and the economy, are just when they distribute relevant social goods, rights, liberties, opportunities, income, and wealth in ways that are mutually beneficial and fair to all of society's members. Justice requires that goods be distributed fairly. Each member of society is entitled to the rights, liberties, opportunities, income, and wealth that, within reason, would enable that person to pursue her favored life course. Or to put the point in another way, each member of society is entitled to a scheme of basic rights, liberties, opportunities, and material goods that is compatible with the equal entitlements of other people. So we've come back around to Simonides' idea that justice involves giving to each what is owed to him, but through the concept of distributive justice rather than the notion of retributive justice. Each member of society gets what he or she is owed by justice through a fair distributive scheme. The most influential contemporary account of distributive justice was developed by John Rawls. His seminal work, A Theory of Justice, was published in 1971. The notion of distributive justice, Rawls develops in that work, something he calls justice as fairness, contrasts with the idea that justice is a matter of conferring deserved benefits and rewards. Rawls argues that justice can't be a matter of moral desert, because distributive outcomes depend on many factors we can't possibly be said to deserve. We don't deserve our birthplace in the social order and the advantages or disadvantages it inevitably confers upon us. Nor do we deserve our place in what Rawls refers to as the natural lottery. That is, we don't deserve our natural talents, abilities, and disabilities, psychological dispositions, or aptitude for mental and physical health, just as we don't deserve the parents we happen to have, the social class we're born into, or the good or bad luck that befalls us. Yet these factors all influence a person's life chances. They make a difference to how well a person can expect to do in society. The difference that social position and natural characteristics make to a person's life chances is most striking in an unjust society where there are few bounds to the rewards that the advantaged members are able to leverage for themselves, and where poverty and racial subordination severely curtail even the most hardworking and talented person's opportunities. Yet even in a just society, attributes like intelligence, creativity, beauty, family support, and health, which are at least partly undeserved, will influence how well a person can expect to do in the course of his or her life. Acknowledging this, Rawls concludes that the distribution of rewards for social and natural advantages should not be thought as a matter of allocating desert. He took what many people would regard as a radical position. A distributive scheme should be to the mutual advantage of all members of society, including the least well-off. Even more than that, Rawls argued, any inequalities in the distributive scheme should be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged when compared with other possible distributive schemes. For example, attaching greater social rewards to some positions, say positions of leadership and responsibility, is justifiable when it creates incentives for the talented to develop their talents to the benefit of all, including the less talented. We all benefit from good doctors and thoughtful political leaders, and their higher salaries would be justified to the extent, and only to the extent, that the least well-off benefit more from this inequality than they would under a more equal distribution of income. In other cases, rewards might be used to motivate people to accept jobs that are especially unappealing. Someone needs to clean up the toxic waste. Sufficient compensation might make the job worthwhile to some people. Rawls argues for the conclusion that a distributive scheme should be to the greatest advantage of all members of society, especially the least well-off, by imagining which principles of justice would be chosen by people charged with the task of choosing principles of justice, were they situated behind a hypothetical veil of ignorance. His idea is that principles of justice as fairness are those principles that would be chosen behind a veil of ignorance. A veil of ignorance is designed to screen out people's knowledge of their own social position, gender, race, talents, religious beliefs, and other personal characteristics, thus making it impossible for anyone to design principles to benefit themselves in particular. Parties to this imagined social agreement are instead forced to choose principles that they would find acceptable from any social position, since behind the veil they're forced to reckon with the possibility that any of the various social positions could turn out to be their own. They must make a choice that's fair to everyone. From a position of ignorance, Rawls reasons, no one would rationally choose the desert principle, assuming we could even coherently apply it. Instead, the parties would agree to something much closer to equal distribution. So suppose we accept a broadly Rawlsian paradigm for thinking about distributive justice, and we agree that all members of society should be guaranteed equal basic rights, liberties, and opportunities, and a level of material wealth and income that, at the very least, makes a decent life possible. Might there be a more limited role in a just society for the notion of individual responsibility? Here's a line of thought suggested by Rawls in A Theory of Justice. It's the responsibility of institutions to distribute goods and opportunities fairly. It's the responsibility of individuals to act well. Institutions and individual persons are each held to relevant standards. Institutions should function justly, and when they do not, they should be reformed. People ought to comply with just laws, and when they do not, punishment may be used to motivate compliance. People who violate their obligations to society should face consequences that are designed to restore a just social order. So let's call this corrective justice. According to a corrective justice paradigm, individual responsibility is understood in relation to the demands of a just social order. Punishment aims to advance justice, understood as a fair distributive scheme for mutual benefit. Someone who disregards the law and violates another person's rights should be persuaded, through the imposition of negative consequences or other strategies to influence behavior, that complying with just law is in his or her interest. Rawls and Plato are aligned in this way of thinking about punishment. They connect punishment to the demands of a cooperative scheme. There's a rationale for the practice of punishment, but it's not to realize an ideal of retributive justice. Now, as Plato's Republic unfolds, the just city emerges as one in which each class of people does its part to preserve and enhance the justice of the whole city. Plato thinks those who do not should be compelled. He imagines punishment to function as a kind of correction for delinquent behavior. It's a form of instruction. Those who are willing to break the laws are educated through legal consequences they face to abide by their better nature. Only in this way does Plato think we avoid the problem of making the unjust person worse, which, as I've mentioned, he thinks would be at odds with justice. Plato's rationale for criminal punishment makes no use of the retributive punishment. There's no role for the value of retribution. Instead, the purpose of punishment is to deter, rehabilitate, and educate. The success of punishment is measured by its consequences, by whether those who have been punished are less likely to violate society's rules and more likely to contribute constructively to it. Wrongdoers should be restored to their proper place in society. There's no claim here about the intrinsic value of giving a bad person the suffering he morally deserves. Instead, criminal justice is designed to contribute to an overall just social order, which involves, fundamentally, acknowledging and addressing the basic needs and potentialities of all members of society, including those of the lawbreaker. Criminal justice belongs to a collective effort to achieve a peaceful order that serves the common good. It's a dimension of social justice. I find Plato's effort to understand the point of criminal justice in relation to matters of social justice appealing. The criminal justice system does not have an independent and self-contained moral rationale. We need not organize either morality or justice around the idea that good people receive benefits and bad people deserve to be harmed. Rawls is right to point to the moral significance of contingencies that affect a person's life chances. These contingencies affect the development of personhood, including what a person counts as good reasons to act in one way or another. How we act is not the only factor that determines who we are. Our choices are themselves the result of myriad factors that have shaped our perception of the relevant alternatives. Plato's view of the importance of natural aptitude, role models, and education acknowledges this, as does Rawls's discussion of the many contingencies, family life, social position, natural talents and dispositions, and brute luck, that influence a person's opportunities, self-understanding, and choices, and hence her life chances. Retributivists are interested in bad actions as evidence of the badness of a person and hence his deservingness of punishment. But moral goodness and badness, as a kind of summary evaluation of personhood, if you will, is not like a particular skill or attribute we might single out to reward or criticize. Personal goodness or badness is not like a specific achievement. If it makes sense at all, it's an evaluation that concerns the organization of the whole person, which includes not only the expressions, particular expressions of a person's will, but how a person who acts understands his or her own choices. Yet the possible courses of action we envision for ourselves as individual people who act as we see fit are organized through a social landscape as much as they are the province of individual determination. Our social environment and history makes a difference to what we view as the alternatives when we decide how to act. If Plato and Rawls are correct, a criminal justice system should be designed to enhance a just distributive scheme. Punishment is justified by, and only by, its likely consequences for establishing a just social order. Justice never involves intentionally doing something that causes greater harm. But if that's true, there's no reason its focus should be restricted to harmful interventions that are designed to influence behavior through coercion and fear. Justice might also attempt to facilitate redress, restitution, and reconciliation. The criminal justice system could accommodate and support the aims of restorative justice. Typically, restorative justice involves a mediated victim-offender encounter that aims to acknowledge and repair the harm a crime has caused. Its victim-centered healing approach usually includes coming to some agreement on a restitution plan that permits the wrongdoer in some way to make amends. The theory is that restorative justice, as an alternative to criminal punishment, brings with it important benefits to victims, perpetrators, and the broader community. It belongs to a public effort at healing and reintegration. I've been discussing reasons to regard both Plato and Rawls's philosophies of justice as contrasting sharply with a popular understanding of retributive justice, but I have not yet attended to an important difference between them. Plato was no fan of democracy. He defended a hierarchical social order in which the city is ruled by philosopher kings, and ordinary people do only the work for which they are most suited by nature, whether that's building, weaving, baking, or farming. The operative notion of personal responsibility in Plato's philosophy is tied to differentiated and hierarchically defined social roles. The objective of the practice of punishment, Plato thought, was to enable a society to function well, and this requires maintaining a rigid social order. in which different classes of people are each constrained to their natural place. When that order is disturbed, punishment functions to restore it. In Plato's vision, human society has a telos, or perfect end state, which he understood to be a state of human flourishing. Each member of society is to play his or her part in a social script that enables the whole society and each person in it to flourish according to his or her nature and abilities. A modern liberal democracy has no telos, and it rejects prescribed social roles. Rather than a shared notion of the good or human flourishing, it's something like equal freedom and fair opportunity that organizes society, at least in theory. No one is to be coerced to adopt any particular notion of life's meaning or purpose. A modern liberal society is pluralistic. It displays a diversity of ideas about what makes a life worth living. Because there's no shared idea of the human good, a just order is oriented around the protection of equal basic rights, liberties, and opportunities, enabling people to pursue their own values and priorities. According to a liberal political philosophy, one suited to a modern, pluralistic, and democratic society, accordingly, it cannot understand criminality as the violation or refusal of a prescribed social role. Criminality is a threat to the just order of equal basic rights and liberties. In a democratic society, each person is obligated to respect the rights and liberties of other people, and there's an important notion of individual accountability connected with this obligation. It's defined by reference to the possibility of a just social order, but not one that can be understood as an organic whole in which different classes of people are assigned complementary roles by nature, or determined to be unworthy of any social position. Punishment is not designed to force people back into a social position to which they're best suited, as measured by the overall good of society, or to the margins of society where they may be vilified and discarded. This point can be made more abstractly. A consequence of embracing a liberal principle of equal basic rights, liberties, and opportunities for all is that punishment cannot be understood simply as an instrument that's useful for promoting the common good. It's not enough that punishment has instrumental value in relation to the good of the whole or of the majority. In a democracy, coercive actions by the state must be justifiable to each person. The state's claim to legitimacy must be acceptable from all points of view, including the perspective of those who are least well off. The practice of punishment is also subject to this evaluative test. This points to a serious problem for the practice of criminal justice in an unjust social order. People who are more likely to be caught up in the criminal justice system are not only those who suffer from mental illness, disability, or addiction, they are also people who are economically, politically, and socially disadvantaged. They are people who have not enjoyed the benefits of equal membership. The problem of crime itself is connected with the injustice of people not getting what they're entitled to. Poverty, alienation, and unfair treatment drive the crime rate up. This reality undermines the retributive thesis, which is my third argument against it. The role the state plays in creating the conditions that foster crime damages the state's moral authority. The state shares responsibility for the problem of crime, and it evades that responsibility when it behaves as though criminal justice is solely a matter of allocating individual responsibility and desert. I would also venture to say that a person whose menu of reasonable possibilities for a decent life is unfairly restricted is less blameworthy for violating the law. An unfairly limited slate of opportunities implicates a society's institutional order and undercuts law's claim to democratic legitimacy. Those who are treated badly in the social order in which they could be treated well, but for the collective will of their fellow citizens, do not owe it to their fellow citizens as such to obey the law. Since people who are systematically disadvantaged are not treated as democratically equal members, they don't owe it to their fellow citizens to respect the law as an expression of democratic equality. This means their blameworthiness for law breaking is diminished, even if it's also true that they have moral reasons not to hurt other people. Punishment in the United States is harsh. Convicted felons are subjected not only to the indignity of incarceration, they are also saddled with the stigma of a criminal record and the social marginalization and exclusion connected to that stigma. These are severe burdens to impose on anyone, but especially on persons who have not enjoyed the benefits of equal membership. If punishment is calibrated to increase the justice of the social order, as I've argued that it should be, those who bear its burdens can rightfully object if they have not and are unlikely to enjoy the benefits a punishment system aims to produce. They can rightfully object because the burdens they're forced to bear are fundamentally unfair. If punishment is permissible to enhance the justice of the social order, it must be to the benefit of all, including those who are least well off. Those who are liable to punishment must agree, at least in theory, that liability to punishment for criminal wrongdoing is a reasonable price to pay for the benefit of the protection of law. Liability to punishment is justifiable when it's a reasonable price to pay for the benefits of the protection of law. Those who do not receive law's protection and do not enjoy the rights and liberties to which they are entitled by law and justice would have no good reason to enter the social agreement. Punishing people who have not received the benefits of law is fundamentally unfair. Social disadvantages that are serious and systematic enough to undermine equal standing are typically rooted in a history of injustice. For example, the dynamics of racial inequality in the United States are rooted in a long history of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. This raises interesting questions about the relationship between prospects for attaining distributive justice and the need to redress the legacy of historical injustice and the impact of that legacy on the public culture. Distributive justice may be seen to call for restorative justice as a measure of historical redress. In conclusion, once we reject the aspirations of retributive justice, as we should, we must also recognize that we cannot achieve criminal justice without a commitment to social justice. The criminal justice system should not be used to benefit our friends and to harm those we perceive to be our enemies. The practice of criminal justice is legitimate only for its contribution to the possibility of a democratically just society. Otherwise, it is seriously compromised in ethical terms. This is seen most clearly by those who are most harmed by it. Thank you.